Real quick, how do you feel about horror games? I'll wait. Go on and get your thoughts together. Sometimes it feels like there are only two types of people when it comes to horror. The A-type, thrill-seeking scare junkies, and the B-type cowards, who will nope out of the room the second something freaks them out. I don't think these two categories are as cut and dry as that, though. As a matter of fact, I'd wager these two types of people have a lot more in common than you might think. Let me know if you've heard this one.
Honestly, I just can't stand it when things try to jump scare me.
If you're the type who hates horror, you're probably thinking,
That's so true, that's so me.
and if you're the type who loves horror, you're probably thinking,
Wait, but they're kind of onto something.
people who love horror also complain about games using cheap jump scares as a crutch to get a rise out of the player. But instead of ending the thought there, they'll go on to elaborate on how they want games that utilize more slow burn, atmospheric horror to really immerse you to the point where the game barely has to lift a finger to instill that good kind of fear that we keep coming back to for more, like spicy food.
Incapacitating.
I've often heard the complaint, though, that even with good atmospheric horror, it still sometimes feels cheap to then cash out that hard-earned fear capital on a scripted jump scare. Well, then it seems like the common thread of reasoning here is that people just plain don't like being jump scared, right? Well, yes and no. The answer is a bit more complicated and ties into the ego. Not ego in the sense of hubris, but ego in the Freudian sense of id versus ego. The part of our minds that draws a dividing line between conscious and subconscious thought. When a scripted spook happens in a video game, or any piece of media for that matter, our ego snaps us into conscious thought. Somebody else scared us. That's not okay. So why is it then that so many people actively seek out well-made horror? Well, it's because they're chasing the genuine fear that hits on the other side of the ego, the subconscious side. How is this accomplished? Well, it's simple. We just have to feel like, to quote an old horror trope, the call came from inside the house. If you get jump scared by, say, your own shadow, something that you're not sure if you saw out of the corner of your eye, or by a set of actions that you yourself set in motion and forgot about, suddenly we no longer have the extrinsic force of the game forcing this fear upon us. Instead, we have nobody to fault for our own terror but ourselves. And that's kind of a beautiful feeling. Enter a game called SignalSimulator. Now, for those who don't know, SignalSimulator is a simulation/psychological horror game released in April of 2018 and developed by one Blagovest Penev. The game was inspired by a real-life American nonprofit organization known as the SETI Institute, founded in 1984 with the goal of gathering signals from outer space in the hopes of finding evidence of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. The acronym SETI even stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. SETI is funded by grants from NASA and the National Science Foundation, as well as by private philanthropy. Among the most prominent supporters of SETI was the late, great Carl Sagan, who was a very vocal proponent of extraterrestrial research.
First time we're mustering substantial, sophisticated, serious scientific searches for extraterrestrial intelligence. There's never been a time like that before. So there is some chance that in the next few decades we will get a signal from some spectacularly distant, spectacularly exotic civilization, and everything on Earth will, as a consequence, change. That is possible.
SignalSimulator takes place on a facility loosely based on SETI's aptly named Carl Sagan Center in Mountain View, California, that listens for radio waves emanating from space using what you may visually recognize as an array of large satellite dishes. But since these dishes listen for signals from deep space as opposed to just orbiting satellites, they actually come together to form what's known as a radio telescope. Now, a radio telescope works exactly how you would expect it to based on the name. If you know how an AM/FM radio detects signals at various frequencies, a radio telescope does basically the same thing, but it listens specifically for cosmic radiation at very low frequencies that can come from the vast reaches of space. Hence the telescope part of radio telescope. These low frequencies do a great job of penetrating through space and reaching even further than light can, but the problem is that they're very susceptible to the radio signals that we humans generate here on Earth. Because of this, these radio telescope arrays have to be situated in remote locations, far away from human civilization, to avoid any noise. Have you ever seen a clickbait article or a YouTube video about the top 10 spookiest sounds from outer space? Well, if you were wondering how we collect sounds like that from light years away, I'll tell you the answer isn't radio telescopes. SETI itself has never actually detected much of anything notable since its inception, and it's received quite a bit of well-founded criticism for that fact. The space sounds you commonly hear in these kinds of videos are what are called sonifications, sounds that are simply interpreted from typical optical telescope data, like that you'll get from the Hubble Space Telescope. You can do it with literally any image. Here's a sonification of my face that you're looking at right now. For the intents and purposes of SignalSimulator, however, the signals you detect in-game can be processed into sounds much like the sonification I just played. On the surface, the game may seem like there's not much to do but gather signals, and honestly, the gameplay loop doesn't get much more complicated than that. There are events and interesting artifacts to find by exploring the map, but fundamentally, very little actually happens in SignalSimulator. The game instead thrives on its atmosphere, the feeling of isolation you get from being stationed at a remote site, and the feeling of paranoia you get from the mystique of the signals themselves, and the fact that the game lets you lock the doors to the facility, despite being 99% sure there's nothing out there. That 1% of uncertainty does so much heavy lifting when it comes to the appeal of this game. Now, unfortunately, despite releasing to positive reception and claiming on the Steam Store page description that a lot more features are coming, development of the game came to a very abrupt halt, and clamor about the game slowly died down. Fast forward 4 years to August of 2022, and a demo would appear on itch.io by developer Mr. Dr. Nose, with a shockingly similar premise. Only this time around, the game takes place on an isolated research lab in the Alps of Switzerland. Just like with SignalSimulator, the goal is to maintain your radio telescope array of 24 antennae, labeled B through Y, and use them to scan for signals from space, analyze them, and process them to send into your colleagues at a different site, and get paid points. Anyone who'd seen SignalSimulator would immediately recognize this as a spiritual successor, some even questioning if it was made by the same developer. Now, obviously, Mr. Dr. Nose is not Blagabest Penep, as far as we know. Just what are you hiding, Mr. Dr. Nose, if that is your real name? The truth is that the game was inspired by SignalSimulator, or rather, by a specific live stream of SignalSimulator by famed Swede musician, member of Vinesauce, and internet funny man, Varg Skeletor, or Joel, as is better known by his friends and viewers. Mr. Dr. Nose's previous games have been known to contain references to Joel's content, and it's commonly said that Mr. Dr. Nose got the idea to make Voices of the Void after watching Joel stream SignalSimulator, cooking up time-gated and random events to indulge the paranoid thoughts that Joel would externalize, and that his chat would gaslight him into believing while playing the game.
If your character doesn't sleep, your character will hallucinate. What? Take your bathroom every now and then. You have a good chance to be abducted by Grey if you don't. What? Don't tell me those things, man.
As of this video, Voices of the Void is still in a pre-alpha phase on version 0.8.2, available for free on itch.io, with a Patreon to support development towards a full release. The game's physics, sound effects, graphical fidelity, and general vibe are very reminiscent of the Gold Source engine, known for Half-Life, despite the game itself actually being made in Unreal 4. In its current state, the game features roughly 40 in-game days worth of timed events, with countless other random events that can happen in a moment's notice, with each in-game day translating to a little over an hour's worth of playtime, although the game speed can be adjusted by the settings if desired. Easier difficulty settings will result in longer days, and harder difficulty settings will have shorter days, varying by up to 25% longer or shorter. Additionally, there's a tab with experimental settings that further allow the clock speed to be increased or reduced by another 50%. At the end of the day, all you've really got to know is that a playthrough of Voices of the Void is a lot of hours of content, which makes sense considering how it's the epitome of slow burn horror. It's not uncommon for the first several hours of gameplay to consist of nothing but getting accustomed to the controls and mechanics. And if you're a neat freak like me, neurotically cleaning up the base, which is absolutely filthy by the time you're stationed there. While we're on the topic of settings, let's quickly go over the rest of them, as there's a lot to break down here that people should probably know before jumping into the game. Keep in mind that all the following is as of version 0.8.2, subject to change. You can access all of the settings at any time, and it's divided into 7 tabs: Render, Video, Audio, Game, Binds, Language, and E for experimental settings, which may at some point be moved to the Game tab once properly tested. So the Render and Video tabs have quite a bit of overlap, as both of these menus affect how the game looks, but you can think of Render as the advanced graphical settings, just as a separate menu instead of a sub-menu of video. As you'd expect from the low-poly gold source aesthetic, very little in Voices of the Void is all that graphically intensive, so you can actually just crank all of this up except for one thing: shadows. The UE4 dynamic shadow rendering in this game is surprisingly robust and actually looks kind of amazing in game, but it's unfortunately extraordinarily taxing, even on some higher-end PCs. The shadow setting here controls the draw distance at which shadows will be rendered, which is a threshold inside of which shadows will start to pop in. At 0, there will be no shadows drawn whatsoever, which will skyrocket your frame rate, but unfortunately the game is pretty ugly with shadows completely off. And at the minimum setting of 1, the pop-in is very noticeable. For the best bang for your performance, I recommend keeping this setting at 2, and instead turning the small object shadows and shadow distance settings completely off, as these settings significantly impact performance for very little noticeable difference in the quality of the lighting. Motion blur you may want to turn off if you're generally not a fan of it, and in this game in particular, things tend to happen that you just narrowly catch a glimpse of out of the corner of your eye as you're looking around, and you don't want the motion blur ruining moments like that. The upscale setting here makes no sense, as the options are just labeled 0 through 4, making it unclear how this slider actually works. It turns out upscaling is a misnomer, and this is actually tied to the upsampling option below it, as a way to choose the type of upsampling that the game's renderer uses, from the following list of options, where 0 is nearest neighbor, 1 is bilinear, 2 is Gaussian, and 3 and 4 are Lanczos, 2 and 3 respectively. To put it in layman's terms, higher number is better quality, and I don't know if this option does anything at all to begin with unless you run the game below your monitor's native resolution. Now, for a bit of a controversial take, I actually recommend playing this game with anti-aliasing turned completely off. And this is for 2 reasons. The first being that the game appears to use a type of temporal anti-aliasing that, while very efficient, causes in-game monitor screens to have a very jarring kind of ghosting effect. The other reason being that the general lo-fi art style of the game just comes together better when you embrace the aliasing as a deliberate aesthetic choice. The best example of this is when looking up at the night sky. With anti-aliasing on, the stars are just sort of dots in the sky like any other game. But with AA off, the aliasing of the low-res star patterns actually makes them stand out more, for the same reason that aliasing is usually a bad thing, for making edges of polygons stand out more. At the end of the day though, this is totally an aesthetic choice and it's up to you. Finally, we come down to the more obscure settings. Sharpness is intended to be a sort of offset for the inherent blurring that comes from the anti-aliasing, but I find that even with AA turned completely off, a sharpness setting of 1 still looks nicer than having it off entirely. Again though, this is an aesthetic choice, not a performance-related one. Disabling the player shadow may seem like a good idea, since shadows impact performance so steeply in this game, but I actually highly recommend keeping it on. Voices of the Void excels at being able to make the player afraid of their own shadow, both literally and figuratively. The next 4 settings pertain to HDR, and are actually very finicky to enable in any way that doesn't make the game egregiously dark, washed out, or cause colors to spill undesirably. After fiddling with these settings for like an hour or so to try and get a clean result, my conclusion is that the game already looks colorful enough with a brilliant dynamic range without needing to enable any of this at all. The Seal Light Lamp IES setting, to break it down simply, has the effect of determining whether lights on the ceiling of an interior illuminate the ceiling itself. Off means a more illuminated ceiling, and on will result in the ceiling appearing darker than the rest of the room. Again, purely aesthetic call here. Moving on to the video tab, which should probably go before render in hindsight, you have more cut and dry settings here like resolution, FOV, VSync, and framerate caps. There's only a few things worthy of note here, the first of which being gamma. At 1.0, the game is dark. Like, even with a light source, it's hard to see dark. I played 1.2, which I think is a good middle ground to keep the dark areas dark and the light sources bright without having to make anything washed out. But of course, this also depends on your monitor settings and it may vary from person to person. Then we have sun rays, which, while beautiful when they work, as of the latest version that I've tested, these sun rays tend to cause weird black artifacting indoors in the daytime, so I recommend turning them off entirely until that particular issue is resolved. You'll also notice that there's a setting here called mirror mode. There's no reason to turn this on, but you might want to remember that it's here. Not much to say about audio, although I'm a huge stickler for good audio design. Voices of the Void is one of the few games where everything feels perfectly balanced at 100. Alright, next up we have game settings. Now there's a lot of important stuff here, but First off, mouse smoothing here at the top and head bob down here near the bottom are two things that you're probably going to want to turn completely off. The only situation in which I can understand leaving mouse smoothing on is if this happens to also affect joystick smoothing when using a controller. With all the precise motor functions this game expects out of you, however, you're probably best off with mouse and keyboard. But there are some limited options available for playing with a controller if you're brave enough to test those waters. I have not. Mouse sensitivity is another thing that you might want to fiddle with. In most games, the default setting for mouse sensitivity is pretty low, but in Voices of the Void, I actually had to turn it down a notch in order for it to be comfortable. Of course, this will depend on factors like your mouse DPI, but it's good to keep in mind. Autosave, I recommend setting to around 45 minutes, which feels like short enough that if you die or crash, you won't lose too much progress, but also long enough that if you do something egregiously stupid, you generally don't have to worry about the autosave kicking in at the worst time and locking you into that bad decision. Difficulty at normal is the intended experience, and I recommend keeping it that way until you become very efficient at completing the daily tasks. As mentioned earlier, difficulty impacts the game speed, but it also affects the quantity of drive and hash codes requested for the daily tasks, which means higher potential pay for those daily tasks if you have the leeway to complete them. The easy difficulties are not very useful except as a way to further extend the day beyond the double length already achievable via the day speed setting. If you want the game to be easier, there are much better ways that don't negatively impact your daily income. As a matter of fact, this is a good time to go over the other difficulty-related settings and why you'd want them on or off. Prop impact physics. This determines whether props can impact with one another or with you. This can cause for some interesting interactions, but it's also a potential vector for dying by, say, crushing your head into a prop. Recommended on because it's funny as hell, but feel free to turn it off if you're dying too much. Kick props/trip over. This determines whether you'll trip over physics objects on the ground or kick them around while running. While this setting is genuinely hilarious, it can get annoying when you're trying to use props that are supposed to help with navigation, like ramps. Recommended off, unless you're a silly little content creator man like myself who's willing to go through a little bit of torture for the laughs. Disable report fines. This is on by default and for good reason. Turning this off will mean that for every day that you do not complete the daily task, you'll receive an ever-increasing fine, potentially putting you into the negative points. Recommended on, as report fines put pressure on you to play the game in a certain way that's not really conducive to getting the most out of it. The game rewards you for making your own goals, and hyper-focusing on the daily tasks can actually get in the way of a lot of the content in the game. In the experimental tab, we have this option here, player physics damage. This effectively turns on or off fall damage. I actually recommend keeping this on to make navigation a bit more thoughtful, but again, if you notice you're sliding and falling down cliffs to your death too often, you can feel free to turn that off. Disable food spoilage. Leaving food out and not in a closed container in your inventory or in the refrigerator can cause it to spoil or get eaten by cockroaches. Disabling it here can fix that, but I actually recommend keeping this on because there are some emergent gameplay situations that can stem from this option. Disable food tolerance. So this is going to be a bit of an unpopular opinion. Voices of the Void has hunger and sleep meters, and unfortunately the player character Kel is a bit of a picky eater, and MREs taste horrible. If you limit your diet to only one type of food, eventually Kel will just straight up refuse to eat it for a while, even if that means starving to death. Practically speaking, this will only ever really be an issue with MREs, as Kel has the lowest tolerance for those by far, but MREs happen to also be the most plentiful source of food on the base. This can definitely be frustrating for newer players, but again, I actually recommend keeping this on, as being forced to scrounge for different sources of food like mushrooms, canned goods, or baked potatoes will encourage you to explore more and leave fewer stones unturned. You'd be surprised how plentiful food is in this game if you just know where to look. Food tolerance also adds a feeling of treating yourself when it comes to actually ordering extravagant food online, like pizza, sushi, baguettes, croissants, shrimp, cheeseburger, nuggets, cookies, cheese, meatballs, all of which can be purchased using points, and many of which have applications beyond just food. Extreme combat. This is a relatively new feature, so I've yet to fully experiment with everything that it does, but it's my impression that this setting adds some flexibility to how you can swing objects that can be used as weapons, and may or may not enable a certain endgame combat encounter. Recommended on, as disabling this setting may disable some content. The Velma mode setting here is a joke setting, but one that I highly recommend keeping on at all times. Trust me, it'll make perfect sense once you're in game.
My glasses! I can't see without my glasses!
Next up, while it has nothing to do with difficulty, you'll notice a strange little setting towards the bottom of the game tab that just reads the funny setting. You're gonna want this on. Trust me. There's also a setting that's on by default that reads automatic ragdoll getup that I recommend turning off for the sheer catharsis that comes from falling over and deciding to stay down for a while to think about what just happened.
We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment?
As I was recording this part, a minor update added these panel color sliders, which are great for customizing how the in-game monitors look. I personally like setting the primary color to green, like in the older builds before they made it orange to match the 70s aesthetic of the main computer. So green here would just be the hex code 00FF00. Finally, the language and binds tabs are pretty self-explanatory, but there are a couple of key bindings here that are worth highlighting. The first one is the Alt key binding. By default, this is bound to, you guessed it, the Alt key. This key is a modifier for performing certain tasks like grabbing, placing, or throwing items. What it actually does in any given moment is pretty context-specific and not at all intuitive, so it's just called Alt in lieu of a more descriptive name. This can cause issues with overlapping generic hotkeys from other apps. One of the primary offenders is the NVIDIA GeForce Experience overlay, which has a default binding of Alt-R, which is also a binding in Voices of the Void for gently dropping an item, as opposed to stowing it away with the R key or chucking it by pressing Alt and left click. You might want to check to see if you have this double binding issue yourself and consider changing the hotkey in the NVIDIA overlay. You may even want to consider rebinding this Alt function to, say, a thumb button on your mouse, if you have one. Further down, you'll also notice a ragdoll binding. This does exactly what you might think. It ragdolls you. It's a good idea to keep this to a binding that you won't fat finger by accident, as ragdolling at inopportune moments can lead to dropping important items. Or maybe just keep it to C and embrace chaos. It's your call. The next binding that I want to call attention to is the dismount key, which is double bound by default to the escape key to access the menu. While the game is hard-coded to lock you out of saving or accessing the menu whenever you're in a mounted position, like riding a vehicle or sitting in a chair, it's still a good idea to rebind the dismount button to something other than escape to avoid situations like accidentally diving out of a moving vehicle when trying to access the menu. Finally, at the very bottom, you'll notice one unbound function that will likely be changed in the future, labeled Demo Snow Mode. This binds a hotkey that can toggle the season between the default climate and a winter one, where all water freezes over and the landscape becomes, well, wintry. As you can see in this current 0.8.2 build, Snow Mode is actually the default, and the usual climate is locked behind a hotkey. This changing of seasons doesn't serve very much practical purpose, but this, alongside the ragdoll key, can make for some interesting chat interaction shenanigans when streaming the game. I personally use a bot called streamer.bot to bind channel point rewards in my own channel to ragdoll or temporarily activate snow mode in game, and it's great. Enough obsessing over options and more talking about the game itself. In Voices of the Void, you play as Dr.Kel, a dorky young PhD graduate and certified twink, freshly carrying your graduation certificate in your surprisingly cute sticker-riddled suitcase upon starting a new game. Although the certificate doesn't legibly say that it's a doctorate, it's a reasonable assumption to make considering the others refer to you as doctor via work emails. As presumably your first job out of college, you've been stationed to the Alpen Signal Observatorium, or ASO, in the fictitious Dunkeltaler National Park of Switzerland. While there's no wrong way to play Voices of the Void, you're tasked with 3 basic responsibilities should you choose to actually do your job. Responsibility number 1 is to maintain the facilities and keep the base fully operational. This means, of course, making sure that the lights are on and that the antennas are calibrated and operational at all times. But it also means keeping the base itself tidy and investing into upgrading the decades-old hardware. There's a store in-game from which you can purchase items using the company points that you're paid in, and one of the items is an item box, which can be used to ship things back to the home base. You're compensated for picking up and sending back the trash littered throughout the base and parts of the game map, and receive small point bonuses for tasks like repairing servers or even scrubbing the toilet, sink, and shower. Responsibility number 2 is in the task sent to you by your superior, Dr.Bao. Not that one. will ask for both signals that have been scanned and processed to whatever extent the base computer can handle, and for diagnostic hash codes from select servers every day that can be obtained by physically writing out to each antenna and requesting the hash code via each respective terminal inside. This can of course be done on foot, but there's also an ATV on site for getting around the game map slightly faster and much more dangerously. Remember kids, it's unsafe to operate an ATV without a helmet. So now that you're fully aware of all of your responsibilities, it's time to get to work. The game throws you in at the northernmost entrance gate. Northernmost? Southernmost? Fun fact, in an earlier build, the player pointed out to Mr. Dr. Nose that the sun rises and sets in the wrong cardinal direction. So to fix it, instead of changing the rotation of the sun in the skybox, he just simply turned all the in-game compasses upside down. So in every map in the game now, the top is actually the southernmost point, which also flips east and west. This can get really confusing when trying to take mental notes of locations using the map, so it's usually easier to just use the antennas as reference points for getting around, since you can point the compass directly to a given antenna using the server terminals. Or you can just be smooth-brained like me and call the blue end of the compass north anyways. I reject your reality and substitute my own. From the jump, you're given absolutely no direction as to what to do or where to go. If you look around a little, you can quickly ascertain that you're at a driveway gate that denotes the entrance to the national park that the game takes place in. And if you try to cross it, you'll hit an invisible wall, which leaves us with no way to proceed except down the road in the opposite direction. Your suitcase is also nearby here should you already have a strong enough grasp of the honestly kind of arcane controls to be able to comfortably hold it while continuing in the direction that you need to go. As you progress, you'll encounter forks in the road with signposts indicating which directions to go to get to which antenna, which are labeled using the NATO phonetic alphabet starting at Bravo and ending at Yankee. You'll also notice signposts pointing towards something called base, which you'll likely intuit as the right direction to go. This also happens to be where the server terminal that would otherwise be labeled Alpha is located. With a little bit of reasoning, and the base itself, along with its distinctive radome on the roof and the massive red flashing radiating tower next to it, we have our destination. Arriving at the base, we're met with a shuttered garage door, and looping around the corner to get to the front, there's a ton of trash piled up in the parking lot, a locked bunker with a note on the ground that simply reads "Do not enter," and the base entrance itself. To the left of the entrance, you'll notice a disabled security camera, which you can activate and move to wherever you think might need an extra pair of eyes. I recommend the garage door, as the front door you can already see out of the window from the main room. On the other side of the door is a keypad, and another sheet of paper taped to the wall, which, when read, reveals to you that the passcode to the door is 1111, which probably inflicts some physical pain upon you if you've ever worked as a sysadmin. I feel like the door is supposed to be locked by default here, forcing you to learn how to interact with the keypads in order to enter the building, but as of the latest version upon making this video, the door is just unlocked from the get-go, meaning you can spend a surprising number of hours in this game without ever learning how to lock or unlock a door. It's not rocket science, of course, you just mouse over the buttons and physically press them, or you can even use the number pad on your keyboard if you have one, and punch in the code, and then either hit the green button or E when not hovering over any button in particular to punch it in. If a door is locked, the keypad will be red, and punching in the password will unlock it. And if the door is unlocked, the keypad will be green, and punching in the password will lock it. The reason I'm explaining how keypads of all things work in such excruciating detail is because server repair, which is one of the tasks you'll be doing a lot in Voices of the Void, operates very similarly. When a server is operational, it'll be green, and when it's in need of repair, it'll be red. You interact with a broken server to repair it, and it'll display a series of basic math problems. Math and/or CS nerds will immediately recognize this jumble of letters and symbols on the right here as taking the generic base 10 modulus operation of the absolute value of the result of the math problem. In layman's terms, all this means is that you can ignore negatives and you can ignore anything in the tens place when punching in the answers, so it'll always be between 0 and 9 for each problem. Once again, you can click the numbers individually or use the numpad. An interesting little tidbit about this repair minigame is that you'll notice it's timed. You earn 5 points of currency for completing the server repair, but if you can beat your previous time, you get 15 points. Early on, it's a good idea to intentionally take your time on these and aim to beat your previous time by about a half a second with each subsequent repair, so you can really make the most out of your points. For the first day, you have no obligations, so just take the time to explore the base, turn on the lights, check the computer and server terminal, type in the word Maxwell, and forage around for stuff. In addition to all the miscellaneous unsellable junk that you're going to need either a wood chipper or a hacksaw to get rid of, You'll also find plenty of batteries, food, those eggshells are still perfectly edible, I swear, notebooks, tools, gas cans, empty drives, and trash bags laying around. All this stuff will quickly fill your inventory, which will then force you to learn how containers work for storage. And there are plenty of filing cabinets, bins, and boxes laying around the base that'll come in handy for storing your important items. I should also point out that if you're a stickler for organization, you can actually make labels out of loose sheets of paper by typing your label into the paper and hitting the Create Label button at the top of the UI, and sticking it to whatever it is you're trying to label. If you check the four corners of your screen, you'll see your flashlight charge in the top right, your frame rate in the bottom right, your hunger and sleep meters among other things in the bottom left, and your money in points in the top left. As you can see, you start on day one with not a dime to your name, and you're not given any tasks yet to earn anything. So a great way to get started on the first day is to take out a loan. You can do this by grabbing a sheet of paper or a notebook, clicking on the loan template on the right hand side, choosing one of the loan plans by typing in the corresponding option, usually D, and sticking it to the top of an empty drive box that you'll find laying around the base. You can then take this drive box to the target, spray paint it out front of the garage that you should have seen on your approach to the base. Then use the control panel inside the garage to call the delivery drone to pick up your parcel and grant you some money to get you started, which you should probably use to buy an item box and some trash bags to start cleaning up and turning a profit. If you use the trash bags on mounds of trash, you can bag them up, load them into the item box, and send that off the same way that you did with the drive box to earn some points. You can also load up the box with loose trash or rocks off the ground and send those in. If you really want to earn some cash fast, you can also sell your MREs and even the fire extinguishers off the walls. I guess that's kind of like getting a new job and immediately selling the copper wiring in the office. I'm sure there's no way that could ever backfire. While you're fiddling around in the garage, you'll probably notice what looks like a workbench in the corner. And on said workbench, there's a weathered-looking notebook that'll tell you that most of these loose pieces of trash everywhere are actually useful for crafting together into various types of scrap. Making that loose trash into scrap instead of selling it all off will pay off down the line when you find yourself needing to make endgame stuff. The MREs you should definitely sell though, as you'll be swimming in way more than Kel will ever actually be willing to eat, and they're surprisingly valuable. I guess there's a lot of Steve MREs out there in Switzerland dying to get their hands on secondhand rations.
Let's get this sat onto a tray. Nice.
Hell, you can even take a few bites out of them first, and the freaks buying them don't seem to mind at all, until that inevitably gets patched. In the process of exploring and looting the base, you probably notice the gigantic crates labeled supplies that are absolutely everywhere. If you smash these open with, say, a hammer, a lead pipe, or even a rock, they'll explode into a confetti of food, scrap, coal, and AOL free trial CDs. These CDs actually do serve a purpose, but the function of them is so negligible that they're honestly better off sold, along with the small chunks of coal that pop out. The large chunks of coal, on the other hand, are worth about a fifth of a can of gasoline apiece if you can take them down to the incinerator of the basement. Don't ask how this machine converts coal into gasoline, it's technology that is far beyond our understanding.
Magic and miracles, that's right.
You can actually burn virtually anything in here to turn it into gasoline, but nothing I've tried yields nearly as much as the large hunks of coal. Of course, you could always just burn stuff anyways to indulge your inner pyromaniac and see what happens. During all this exploring, cleaning, and looting, the clock slowly hits midnight, and you gaze outside to see a beautiful meteor shower embroidering the night sky. The vista's so beautiful you could stare at it for hours, if not for the chirp from the PC bringing you down to earth. It's your boss, Dr.Bao. You've got work to do. Let's take a moment to talk about some of the equipment that you've got on base. Some of it is straightforward, and some of it is intentionally arcane. There's of course a tutorial that goes over most of this as well that you should also poke around in, but I'll go over it all here for posterity. Starting with the simplest to explain, let's go over the bedroom. Here you've got your bed for sleeping, which replenishes your S gauge. Sleep gauge, stamina gauge, whatever works for you. You've also got a bathroom with a toilet and a shower that can be used for similar purposes. The toilet replenishes 5 sleep instantly, but can only be used every so often. If you aren't poop maxing, what are you even doing? The shower, which as of this video only gets cold water, is a good way to replenish some sleep when you're low, just by taking a dip. At which point it'll restore you up to a certain minimum threshold, I think 20. This is great to use before bed or when you need a little boost to get through a workload right before the end of the day. This also works as a water source, so you can use your shower to fill buckets and the like. Next we've got the kitchen. You'll notice the sink and oven are in need of repair, but the microwave should work for cooking or warming up food, provided you actually manage to plug it in. Get in there! The use option on the microwave will adjust the timer, and the activate option will turn on the microwave. For most things, you're going to need the full minute, and some food items might even take a bit longer than that to fully cook. Your fridge, as you'd expect, keeps foods from spoiling longer. It's important to note that just like a real fridge, your perishable foods placed in here might still spoil. They'll just take considerably longer to do so. If you're not planning on eating something anytime soon, the freezer is a better bet. Moving on to the main room, we have a lot of interesting equipment. The first of which you're likely to start fiddling with is the personal computer, reminiscent of a 90s desktop. In previous builds, this is actually a laptop, and it's likely that in future builds, you'll actually be able to purchase a laptop that you can use on the go. But for now, this is your battle station from which you'll read emails, make purchases, monitor cameras, manage your signal database, and perhaps most importantly, purchase upgrades. Next off to the side of the room, you'll notice the radar console. The radar spans pretty much the entirety of the fenced-off area of Dunkeltal that makes up the game map, and every dot you see here represents an entity that it can detect, be that you, some of your equipment, your cameras, or something unknown entirely. Once you get the radar upgraded, you'll be able to color code the dots as shown, and even have it make a sound when something new appears. If you're feeling adventurous, you can even use the radar panel, scroll to a coordinate or an entity, and hit enter to target it with your compass for exploration. Now, I should note that the radar isn't always perfect. Some things won't be able to be picked up via radar, and sometimes things will show up on the radar that don't appear to be anything at all when you run out to explore them.
What are you?
Next, we have the servers and the root terminal in the adjacent room. The servers are straightforward. You just have to check them periodically and make sure that they're all operational. The terminal here works just like the ones you'll find at each antenna, and can be used to ping the other servers to see which ones are down, target each individual antenna for navigation, or calibrate to make sure that all of the antenna are at peak performance in addition to being online. Finally, the elephant in the room, the Stolus Astral Processing Unit, or the APU as I'll call it for short. This bad boy is what you use to actually collect signals, and it can be very daunting to wrap your head around, but once it clicks, it's surprisingly straightforward. Finding and processing signals is a 3-step process. Step 1 is to use the space nav directly to the right of the PC to search around in space for any errant radio signals. Once you ping with the shift key, you'll see red arrows pointing in the direction of any signals that responded. The smaller and closer the arrow is to the center, the closer the signal is to your current position. These signals can be false positives and will disappear over time, so it can be tricky to actually find a good one until you've properly upgraded the cursor speed, the success rate, and the ping cooldown. Sometimes you'll find one right away, and sometimes you'll be trapped in an eternal hell of ping cooldowns and signal errors, making you reconsider why you even bothered getting a job at this dead-end remote facility in the first place. You could have had a nice 9 to 5, probably making 6 figures by now, and maybe somebody to marry and settle down with, but no, you just had to follow your dreams of being an astronomer no matter how much your mom would crumple up your drawings and tell you that aliens aren't Oh, hey, we got a signal. Step 2 was to wait a few seconds until all of the antenna and the radio telescope array physically moved to point in the direction of the signal that you found, so that the detector to the far left can pick it up. From here, you're going to have to fiddle with the knobs to adjust the polarity and frequency to synchronize with the signal so that it can start getting downloaded. This is the most overwhelming part, as all the numbers, graphs, and monitors can be a lot to process, so let me boil it down. The end goal is to ultimately get the red downloaded percentage up to 100. In order for the download to begin, however, both the F polarity and F frequency percentages also need to be near 100%, or as close as you can reasonably get them. Let's start with frequency on the bottom, as that's a bit simpler to explain. If you look down, you'll notice a switch that says toggle frequency. Flip that so the light turns green, and you'll be able to begin changing the frequency. This is a lot like changing the tuner on an FM radio, except you can't move the dial directly. Instead, you set a speed for it to move automatically. You'll see knobs labeled 1, 10, and 100. If you move one of these knobs by 1 notch, the target frequency will immediately begin driving by that amount until it eventually hits the maximum of 1000. During this process, you'll notice the lower set of bars on display light up and then increase and then go back down. What you need to do is keep your hand on the dial by holding the use button, E by default, and then looking up at the display and using your scroll wheel to accelerate by a notch, wait for the meter to light up, and then immediately use the scroll wheel to put the speed back down to 0 to stop it near the top. If you take a look at the F frequency percentage, you'll probably notice that it's no longer at 0%. From here, you can use the more precise 1 knob to begin driving more slowly, either up or down depending on if you pass by the sweet spot, until you approach 100%. For fine-tuning, it's better to look at the actual percentage on the bottom right rather than the bars on the meter. The frequency sweet spot tends to be really sensitive, so you're not going to be able to get an exact 100%, but you should be able to hit 99.9 something. The closer you get and the healthier your servers are, the faster the download will go. Next, you just do the exact same thing, but for the polarity side. There are two major differences here. The first being that rather than being a range from 0 to 1000, you have a full circle here that'll loop around again once you hit the maximum. The next is that there are 3 different polarity directions that you need to guess and check between to actually find the signal's sweet spot. Think of it like 3 different circles that you need to walk around, and only one of them will have the signal somewhere on it. There's an upgrade to have the computer to automatically select the correct polarity direction every time, so that you no longer have to worry about it. But this is more of a peace of mind thing than an actual time saver, as realistically you'll be saving like a couple of seconds. You'll also notice a blurry image gradually forming in the top right screen. This is visual telescope data of the origin of the signal that you found. You can upgrade the detector quality to increase the resolution of this image, and you can upgrade the sensitivity and frequency of the detector to make it form faster. The only reason you want to make it faster is because even if the signal has finished downloading, you can't save and export it until the detector has also finished. But generally speaking, downloading is going to be the main bottleneck here. As a matter of fact, downloading can take so long that it's better to do something else and come back later to check up on it. Finally, once your signal's downloaded, you can hit the big green save button to save it to the APU's memory, after which you can slot an empty drive into the panels directly to the right where the audio player is, and hit the yellow button to export it to the tape. And here, step 3 is to process it into something that humans might be able to parse. You can play an unprocessed signal, but in most cases you'll just end up with static. Instead, once you've got your signal exported, and assuming you've purchased at least one of the 3 processing level upgrades, you can drag that tape over to the slot on the opposite side, labeled the Auto Processing / Decryption Unit. Import the signal, and hit the green button to begin processing. Again, this is a time-consuming process that takes about as long as downloading, so these 2 steps are a good idea to pipeline, and leave running while you go off to do other things. I should note here that if you've unlocked multiple levels of processing, you'll have to hit the green button a 2nd or 3rd time to keep processing the 2nd or 3rd levels once the previous level is completed. Again, there's an upgrade to be able to set this to perform automatically, but until then, this will just be an extra bottleneck that you'll have to worry about. If you ever come across a signal that you know will be something interesting when fully processed, but don't have the resources to process it just yet, you can always hit that silver external save button by the audio player while your signal is imported to the APU's memory, and it'll create a digital copy of that signal on your PC. Then later on, once you've got full upgrades, you can check the PC's database tab and either listen to the signal data from there, or click the copy button to create a duplicate of that signal that you can then export and process further. Alright, we've gone over the equipment, now let's segue to your coworkers. The characters that you never see, but that you're constantly interacting with by email and the occasional care package. Keep in mind the storytelling in this game is rather vague and open to interpretation, so the following is derived from the drip feeds of lore that the game gives you, alongside information divulged directly from the developers, with some creative license to fill in the gaps. And to begin with, let me introduce Stolas. This is basically the in-universe equivalent of NASA, or perhaps more accurately SpaceX, as Stolas has developed most of the equipment that you use on the base, and also serves as one of the primary sources of funding for the ASO. Their motto is Ad Caelum ad Infernum, which is Latin for to heaven, to hell. You never knowingly interact with anyone from Stolas, so not a lot is known about them outside their logo being slapped on everything. Even what Stolas could possibly be an acronym for, or if it's an acronym at all, is a mystery. Next at the top of the chain of command is Dr.Bao. Dr.Bao is the lead researcher of the ASO and your boss. He's an accomplished scientist who's very single-minded in the pursuit of his research, even at the cost of the well-being of his subordinates. The rumors surrounding what happened to the last person stationed to Kel's position are not great. Dr. Bao comes off as stoic and by the books, indicated by the lack of a customized profile icon on his emails. Professor Leah is the main supervisor of the ASO headquarters and sends you your first email containing a rough outline of your job, interestingly breaking the 4th wall and telling you that the nuclear reactor isn't implemented yet, so you don't have to worry about it. The reactor in question being a planned feature that's yet to be implemented as of 0.8.2. Although she has concept art, you never really interact with Professor Leah in any way outside of this one email, so it's likely that her role in the game will change or be fleshed out in future updates. Dr.Ena, or Inara, appears to be the closest colleague of Kel's, knowing him since before he was stationed at the ASO, and periodically checking up on him to make sure that he's okay.
Oh, I'm not okay.
Yeah, it's rumored that Kel even got his position at the ASO through his connection to Inara. Dr.Ena apparently doubles as both a researcher and a weapons specialist for the ASO headquarters, although as of yet there's not much interaction in the game to do with that latter role. She's much older than Kel and shrouded in mystery, apparently being wanted in France for reasons undisclosed. To boil down her character in just one description, Inara's a bad French big titty goth GF. Fittingly, she uses a dark blue wolf as her profile icon. Dr.Max, or Maxine, is a younger researcher working at the ASO headquarters and also appears to be fond of Kel, or at least considerate of his well-being alongside Dr.Ena. Maxine is described as awkward and easily scared, and uses a sleeping cat as her profile icon. Dr.Ken is another researcher that you'll sometimes receive feedback from, although as of yet he has no concept art that I know of, and is apparently not a member of the same team as Dr.Ena and Dr.Max. He's easygoing, but displays the most extensive knowledge when analyzing the signals sent to HQ. His profile icon appears to be one of Neptune, but could also just be a generic icon of a blue planet with a ring. And that's the whole crew. I don't think I missed anybody, so let's get on with the,
To the poor sucker that gets stationed here after me. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Probably served my purpose, just like the several stiffs stationed here before me. I'm leaving this record behind so you'll learn from my mistakes and think before you sing for the higher-ups. Day 1. Caught me off guard when Bao offered to station me here. I said no at first. The pay is good, near. No one can get on my case for sneaking a drink during work hours. It's not like I was close with anyone at HQ anyways. Also, being this remote makes it real easy to see the night sky. Maybe I'll like it here. Day 2. Made my first purchase besides food and drink. Haunted cactus. Think I'll name him Vinny. Also, it took me until just now to figure out how to get into administration to turn on the lights. Apparently that one room was a different password from all the rest. Why even bother with an administration room when there's only ever one bloke stationed out here at a time? Day 6. Still got my marbles, but gods is it boring out here. Nothing but the same old planet and star signals. Give me an alien message or something. Maybe I'll take up mushroom foraging and try buying one of those personal assistant robots. Won't exactly make for a great drinking buddy, but it's better than nothing. Day 8. Robot came in yesterday. Spent the whole day poring over the manual trying to wrap my head around all his functions. I sent him out to perform some routine server maintenance and he didn't come back until this morning. And I thought he'd wandered in the lake or something. When I checked his camera, it was just hard at work. Guess I've been neglecting the server upkeep. I think I've got a good name for this little guy. He's a Kerfur model. Likes staying out at night, so I think I'll just call him Kerfu. Day 12. I'm fucking losing it. I found a mannequin on the basement that wasn't there before, so I boarded it up with some blanks. I know mannequins can't move on their own, but I'm not gonna be the one with his pants down on the off chance they can. I checked Kerfu to see if he'd been moving things around, but he was asleep, charging exactly where I left him last night. I also got my wish of wanting to find a signal besides stars and planets. It just comes up as object. I guess that's the most I can expect out of this ancient tech. I just finished upgrading the signal processor, so I let it run overnight and check the results in the morning. Day 13. This signal. It kind of sounds like speech. Not any language I've ever heard, though. If I send this back to HQ, they're gonna think I've lost my marbles. Or maybe this is exactly what they've been looking for. Day 14. I sent the signal back to HQ, but they didn't react to it quite the way I would have expected. Maybe I was just overthinking it after all. Day 16. There's something else out here besides me and Kerfu. These past couple of days I've woken up with a pack of prawns under my covers. Why prawns? I don't remember buying these. They're not my order history. I'm going to do a once-over around the perimeter of the base to make sure there's nothing hiding out here and watching me. There's a way into the vents from the computer room. Which comes to shove, I can sleep up there for safety. Day 18. The vents aren't safe. They know where I am. No matter where I go, it's more prawns. These flavorless MREs are whittling away at my sanity like nails on a chalkboard. They know it. They want me to eat the prawns. I won't do it. I'll eat wild mushrooms instead if I have to. Day 19. Power went out today. Left me in total darkness. Kerfu's battery died at the worst possible time. I had to trace the power lines back to the faulty transformer. There's an office in here I can use to sleep in. Maybe they won't find me way out here. Day 20. I was an idiot to think they wouldn't find me. For some reason they boarded the entrance with wooden planks, so now I can't leave. And tomorrow I'll try finding another way out. Day 22. Messed up my leg, something fierce trying to kick open a vent grate to crawl out of. Gate's torn open now, but so's my leg. Fortunately, there were medical supplies here I can use to stop the bleeding. I have my ticket to freedom, but I'm not leaving until I can run on it again. Day 23. Oh, I can hear clawing noises outside, like somebody dragging an axe across pavement. I can't tell if it's trying to get in or just circling around. It's possible blood loss is going to me. It's all my imagination. Either way, I'm not leaving this damn transformer until I know it's safe out of there. Day 25. I've lost Kerfu. I made it back to the base, but he's not where I left him. Where the fuck could he be? This is not okay. I am not okay. Day 26. So sick of these fucking prawns. Every day there's another one. They gathered all of them AI wash station. I'm going to take a gas can to them and set them ablaze. I won't take it anymore. Day 30. Made it all wrong. I knew I wasn't alone out here, but didn't realize the half of it. I think I finally understand why Dr.Bao sent me out here now. He doesn't care about the signals. Not the ones on the tapes, anyhow. All this time, there was only one thing keeping me safe. I let my paranoia blind me to it. Now it's only a matter of time. I won't give them what they want. I'm done eating their MREs. I'm done repairing their equipment. I'm done reading their emails. I'm done sending their signals. I won't be their canary.
One more thing I'll say about Voices of the Void before I end this video is that the game is very evocative of what it was like to play games pre-internet. Which is funny because the primary demographic for this game was probably not old enough or even alive to remember that feeling. But it was a time before you could just look up a game or watch a video and learn everything there is to know. It was a time when you'd hear urban legends about secrets that may or may not exist, like how to get Yoshi in Mario 64 or how to bring a certain flower girl back from the dead. In the pre-internet era, there was no way to validate rumors like these but to just try them yourself. Similarly, you'd never quite be able to debunk those rumors because there'd always be that voice in the back of your head insisting that you just weren't doing it right. Maybe you didn't punch that wall enough times, or maybe you just didn't leave the game CD in the freezer long enough. So how can it be then that a game that is almost exclusively discussed on the internet can be reminiscent of a pre-internet era of gaming? Well, part of it has to do with how the game is constantly receiving updates, changing, or adding events and mechanics. Another large part, however, is how obscure and random the happenings that can occur in Voices of the Void can be, and how nothing is ever explicitly communicated to the player. Things will just simply happen, and happen in a way that is unique to your playthrough, that you yourself will have to make your own story out of and contextualize in your own way. There are some things about this game that sound like complete nonsense when you try to describe them to somebody else out loud, and others that may seem plausible but are just rumors spread by the fanbase for fun, or simply out of misinformation. There are also cases where the latter will be made into the former by the developers being in on the jokes, or the former into the latter as a way to keep players on their toes to keep trying to find new solutions to old problems. Hell, this video I'm making right now is subtly but surely feeding into the rumor mill surrounding the game, and somehow the more people talk about it, the more mysterious it becomes. In a way, the game is the proverbial void, and you and I are the voices trying to permeate it and make contact. Let me know if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this. I do have another short follow-up planned to be more of a tutorial for things like importing custom assets into the game or adding Twitch integration. By the way, I have a Twitch channel that I'm currently trying to grow and hopefully make a push towards partnership. I stream a variety of games, and I'm always looking to share unique twists on games with my own challenges, mods, or chat integration. You can catch me at twitch.tv/Mountlover. A simple follow there, and a subscription and a like here on YouTube will go a long way towards enabling me to make content like this full time. Either way, thanks for watching to the end, and hopefully I'll see you again. Until then, keep moving forward.